The stars above the colony world of Haven were calm, bright, and beautiful, yet something felt wrong. The people of Haven lived simple lives. Farmers grew food on the green plains, traders moved goods through the small spaceport, and children played under the clear skies. 4 years, the colony had been peaceful, far away from the troubles of the galaxy. Families believed they were safe, protected by the promise that no enemy would dare attack a human world. But one night, that promise shattered. The first sign came in silence. The communications tower of Haven suddenly stopped sending signals. At first, Earth Command thought it was a technical problem. Wires fail, systems break, satellites fall. No one panicked in the beginning. But then the hours stretched into days, and no ship arrived, no message came. Families on nearby colonies began to worry. Mothers sent messages to children who never replied. Traders called out to friends on Haven, only to hear static. The silence grew heavier with each passing hour. Something was wrong. A small patrol ship, the Silver Star, was sent to investigate. Its crew of 30 men and women knew Haven well. Many had visited its markets, shared food with its people, and even had family there. As the ship approached the star system, the crew tried to contact the colony again. "This is the Silver Star to Haven Control. Do you read us?" Only silence answered. The crew grew uneasy. Signals could not be lost so completely without reason. They pressed on, engines burning as they entered orbit around Haven. What they saw froze the blood in their veins. The colony was dead. The green fields were blackened, burned with fire. The cities were nothing but ruins, craters where buildings once stood. Smoke still rose into the atmosphere, drifting across the planet like a ghostly shroud. The spaceport was destroyed, wreckage floating silently in orbit, pieces of ships torn apart by unimaginable force. The crew looked in horror as their scanners revealed thousands of bodies, frozen in the cold void, drifting endlessly in silence. Fathers, mothers, and children, all gone. Haven had been slaughtered. The captain of the Silver Star clenched his fists as he stared at the devastation. His voice shook when he ordered the ship to record everything. They sent drones to scan the surface, searching desperately for survivors. But there were none. Every home had been burned, every shelter destroyed, every street covered with ash. The recordings captured more than destruction. Strange symbols had been carved into the ruins, burned deep into stone and steel. Alien symbols. Markings that spoke of hatred, cruelty, and warning. The crew realized the truth. This was no accident. This was no disaster of nature. Haven had been massacred by alien hands. The crew struggled with their emotions. Some wept quietly as they saw the faces of people they once knew, now lifeless. Others trembled with rage, fists tight and jaws clenched. The youngest officer whispered a single word, a word that carried the weight of every human heart that would soon hear the news. Why? They did not know who the enemy was. They did not know how many had done this. But they knew one thing: humanity could not stay silent. The captain of the Silver Star sent a message back to Earth Command, his voice filled with grief and anger. "This is Captain Reeve. Haven has fallen. No survivors. Colony destroyed. Repeat, no survivors. We found alien markings. This was an attack." His voice cracked, but he continued. "Humanity must answer." Back on Earth, the message spread like fire. Screens lit up across cities, colonies, and ships. The footage of Haven's ruins was shown to millions. Families collapsed in tears, friends screamed in grief, and leaders stared in silence, their faces pale with shock. For the first time in generations, humanity felt the old fear. The fear of extinction, the fear of being hunted. But alongside fear, another feeling grew stronger: rage. In the halls of the United Human Council, voices rose in anger. Some called for caution, demanding investigation before action. Others pounded their fists on tables, shouting for war, shouting for revenge. The images of dead children floating in the void left no room for delay. Humanity's heart had been struck, and humanity's heart burned with fury. Yet outside the council chambers, the ordinary people had already decided. Across the colonies, miners, engineers, soldiers, and pilots all whispered the same vow: Haven will be avenged. The silence of Haven would not remain unanswered. The people demanded justice, and justice would come with fire and steel. Even before the council made its decision, shipyards began working day and night. Families said their goodbyes as sons and daughters joined the fleet. Old war veterans came out of retirement, their eyes filled with grim determination. Humanity was preparing for something vast, something the galaxy had never seen before. But for now, the Silver Star still orbited Haven, watching the ruins one last time before leaving. As the ship turned away, a final scan picked up a faint signal, a broken, distorted transmission buried deep in static. The crew held their breath as the message played. Screams echoed through the speakers. Human voices crying out in pain, cut short by alien roars. The sound of weapons, fire, and terror filled the room. Then silence again. The youngest officer covered her ears, tears falling down her face. The captain stood tall, his eyes burning with fury. "Record it," he ordered. "Let Earth hear what happened here. Let them know why we fight." The Silver Star jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying the terrible truth home. Behind them, the silent colony of Haven drifted under the stars, a tomb of ash and sorrow. Humanity would never forget. Humanity would never forgive. The massacre of Haven was not the end. It was the beginning. The Silver Star raced back to Earth carrying the terrible proof of what had happened to Haven. When the ship finally docked at the orbital station above Earth, the crew looked like shadows of themselves. They had seen too much. They had walked through silence that still echoed in their minds. The moment Captain Reeves stepped into the command chamber, he gave the order to transmit the data across every secure channel. Images of the ruined colony filled the massive screens: burned cities, floating bodies, alien symbols carved into the wreckage. The council chamber, usually filled with calm discussions, turned into chaos. Some leaders stood in shock, hands covering their mouths as they saw the destruction. Others shouted over one another, demanding answers that no one could give. Families who had loved ones in Haven filled the public halls, begging for news, begging for names, but there were none. No survivors. Only ashes. When the recording of the broken transmission played, the chamber fell silent. The screams of men, women, and children echoed through the speakers. Alien growls followed, sharp and brutal, until the recording cut into static. That silence after the screams was worse than the screams themselves. It felt final. It felt like death itself had spoken. Across Earth and every human colony, the footage spread like wildfire. People who had never even heard of Haven cried as if they had lost family. It was no longer about one colony. It was about humanity itself. The massacre of Haven was a wound that cut across every heart. On the streets, crowds gathered, holding pictures of lost loved ones, demanding justice. The word revenge was whispered in every corner, rising louder with each passing hour. For the first time in generations, humanity was united not by politics, not by trade, but by grief and fury. Yet in the council, arguments raged. Some leaders warned of rushing into war. "We don't even know which alien empire did this," one minister shouted, his voice shaking. "If we attack blindly, we may ignite a fire we cannot control." But others had no patience for hesitation. Admiral Karan, a war veteran who had once fought in the border skirmishes decades ago, stood up with his fists tight. His voice roared across the chamber. "They slaughtered our people. They carved their hate into our ruins. They left no survivors. You think they will stop if we stay silent? No. They will strike again. Unless we show them what it means to wake the fury of humanity." His words struck deep into the hearts of everyone listening. Many of the younger officers nodded fiercely. Even some who had argued for caution now stayed quiet. The footage of dead children drifting in space played again in their minds. Could humanity really wait? Outside, shipyards already moved faster than the council's words. Engineers, mechanics, and builders worked without sleep. Warships that were half-finished were rushed into service. Older ships, retired and silent in orbit for years, were pulled back into life. Civilians volunteered to help, welding, loading, fueling. Every hand was needed. Humanity was moving to war, whether the council had spoken or not. On one distant colony, a miner watched the news and put down his tools, whispering to his son, "They killed Haven. Tomorrow I will join the fleet." On another world, a group of students walked into the recruitment office together, saying they would not let their generation be remembered as cowards. Even on Earth itself, old veterans who could barely walk lined up, demanding one last chance to serve. The massacre had awakened something dangerous, a united human will. Back in the council chamber, the arguments reached a breaking point. The chamber grew louder and louder, until Admiral Coron slammed his hand on the table with such force that the room fell silent. His voice was low but filled with steel. "We do not need more debate. We need action. And if the council cannot give it, then the people will take it themselves. I say we call the fleets. Every ship. Every world. Every soldier. 500,000 warships, if not more. Let the galaxy know, if you kill one human colony, the whole of humanity will rise." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one by one, voices began to agree. The decision was made. Orders were signed. Humanity would not wait. Humanity would strike back. News of the decision spread in hours. Across the colonies, the call to arms was clear. Recruitment centers overflowed. Factories worked without rest. Military academies opened their doors wider than ever before. Even children too young to fight sent letters to soldiers, promising to build, to repair, to support in any way they could. Humanity was no longer just preparing. Humanity was already marching. But in the dark corners of space, the enemy watched. On a distant world, the alien empire responsible for Haven's destruction gathered their leaders. They laughed when the first reports came. "The humans cry," one alien general hissed. "They scream for revenge, but they are weak. Their fleets are scattered, their colonies far apart. We will burn them one by one." Yet even as they mocked, there was unease in their voices. They had expected fear, not fury. They had expected silence, not 500,000 warships rising from the shadows of Earth. One alien advisor warned his emperor, "Do not underestimate them. Humans fight differently. They do not forget. They do not forgive. If they come, they will not stop." The emperor dismissed the warning, but the seed of fear had been planted. Back on Earth, the Silver Star's crew was honored as the first witnesses, but their hearts remained heavy. They wished they had never seen what they had seen, never carried such grief back home. Yet deep inside, they knew they had given humanity what it needed: truth. Truth that burned like fire, truth that would not allow peace, truth that demanded war. As the sun set over Earth's skies, thousands of ships rose into orbit, preparing for the battles ahead. Families stood in silence, watching as their loved ones left. No one knew if they would return. But they knew why they left. Haven had been massacred. Humanity would answer. The first blood had already been drawn, and humanity would make sure the galaxy remembered the name Haven forever. And in the darkness of space, fleets began to gather, their engines glowing like stars of wrath. The war had not yet begun, but the sound of its footsteps already shook the galaxy. Across Earth and her faraway colonies, the call went out like thunder in the void. Assemble every ship, every soldier, every resource. Humanity had chosen its path, and there was no turning back. The order was simple but carried the weight of an entire species: war. At first, the skies above Earth were crowded with confusion, as thousands of warships old and new lit their engines, rising from shipyards, orbital docks, and hidden stations. The great shipyards in orbit burned bright through the night, their massive arms welding steel, engines, and weapons at a speed never seen before. Ships that had been retired decades ago were hauled out of storage, patched together, and returned to service. On Mars, engineers worked without rest, turning cargo freighters into makeshift gunships. On the colonies near the edge of human space, civilians volunteered their own craft, fitting weapons where cargo bays once were. The fleet was growing, and every human hand was helping build it. In the streets of every city, recruitment offices overflowed with people. Old soldiers returned, their eyes tired but unbroken. Young cadets came forward in groups, swearing to defend humanity even if it meant their lives. Some came because they had lost family in Haven, their grief burning into rage. Others came because they feared what would happen if they stayed behind. All came with one belief: humanity must rise together. The military struggled to process the flood of volunteers, but even so, the people refused to go home. If they were not given rifles, they picked up hammers. If they were not given uniforms, they carried supplies. Humanity was moving as one, like a single giant preparing to strike. The council had made its decision official, but it was the people who gave the decision power. From the icy moons of Europa to the desert mines of Proxima, workers left their stations and lined up to serve. Soldiers, mechanics, engineers, scientists, even farmers. Every kind of human had become part of the war effort. In one orbital dockyard, a young engineer named Lien wiped grease from her hands as she stared at the half-finished battleship Titan's Wrath. Her father had died on Haven, and she whispered to the massive ship, "You will be his vengeance." On another world, a group of children waved goodbye to their mother as she entered a shuttle to join the fleet, their small voices shouting, "Bring justice for Haven." Humanity was not just building ships, they were building purpose. Across the galaxy, other species watched nervously. Some had once seen humans as weak, divided, and too young to stand against ancient empires. But now they saw something they had never seen before: unity. Humans, who argued endlessly in peace, now stood as one in war. Alien ambassadors whispered to their leaders that humanity was dangerous when wounded, that they would not stop until every debt was paid. The fleets began to gather. First came thousands of ships, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Battleships with heavy guns, carriers carrying swarms of fighters, cruisers bristling with missiles, and even small corvettes, fast and agile, all joined the growing armada. In orbit above Earth, the sight was breathtaking, a sea of steel and fire stretching across the stars. The people who looked up from the surface whispered in awe, "This is humanity's answer." Admirals met in command stations, watching the numbers rise. It was more than anyone had imagined. 500,000 ships were on the move, a force greater than any humanity had ever commanded. The galaxy had never seen such a gathering of war machines under a single banner. Yet the admirals knew numbers were not enough. The enemy was ruthless, and the massacre of Haven had proven that they were not afraid of slaughter. Humanity would need more than ships. They would need courage, strategy, and sacrifice. In the war rooms, plans were drawn and redrawn. Scouts were sent to track enemy movements. Supply lines were mapped across light years. Hidden bases were built on moons and asteroids. The fleet was not just preparing to defend, it was preparing to strike. But still, the people wanted to see them leave. In every colony, families gathered near launch sites, cheering as the warships took off. Children waved flags, old veterans saluted, and voices shouted blessings into the skies. They knew many of those ships would never return, but they shouted anyway, because silence would dishonor the dead. Back aboard the Silver Star, Captain Reeve stood on the bridge, watching as more ships joined the armada. His crew, once broken by the sights of Haven, now stood taller, fueled by purpose. They had seen what happened when humanity was struck, and now they were witnessing what happened when humanity struck back. Reeve spoke softly to his officers, but the words carried weight. This is not just a fleet. This is every heart, every tear, every scream from Haven. This is humanity's voice, and it will be heard. Yet even as the fleets gathered, the enemy was not idle. Far across the stars, the alien empire watched in disbelief as reports arrived. Their scouts returned with tales of human warships filling the void like endless waves. One alien commander sneered, "They are ants pretending to be giants. We will crush them." But another, older and wiser, shook his head. Do not underestimate them. Ants can drown an empire when they march together. The Emperor of the Aliens dismissed the warnings and ordered his generals to prepare for a coming storm. Still, whispers of fear spread even among their soldiers. For the humans had shown a truth the galaxy had forgotten. Unity born of grief was stronger than fear. The day of launch came. On Earth, the largest gathering of ships in human history prepared to depart. Engines glowed like burning stars, weapons charged, and banners of every colony were displayed on hulls. The admirals gave the order, and the fleet began to move. From the ground, it looked like the sky itself was tearing open, filled with fire and thunder. Families wept as they watched their loved ones leave, but their voices carried one message: bring them justice. Do not stop until it is done. In the command chamber of the flagship Resolute, Admiral Karan stood before his officers. His old eyes burned with determination. Today we march not as colonies, not as Earth, not as scattered worlds. Today we march as humanity. We do not fight for power. We fight for the screams of Haven. We fight so that no world will ever be slaughtered again. His words echoed through every channel, reaching soldiers across the fleet. The reply was not words but action. Soldiers tightened their armor. Pilots powered up their ships. Engineers double-checked weapons. The fleet was ready. 500,000 human warships stretched across the stars, engines glowing, weapons armed, hearts burning. The galaxy had watched in silence when Haven fell. Now the galaxy would watch humanity rise. The call to arms had been answered, and the march of humanity had begun. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was waiting, but they had no idea what was coming. Humanity was not just bringing ships. Humanity was bringing wrath. The human fleet stretched across the stars like an endless wave of steel and fire, 500,000 warships united under one banner. Their engines burned bright, their weapons charged, and their crews filled with determination. Yet the galaxy is vast, and in war, the first strike rarely comes from the side that waits. As the armada advanced through the void, an urgent transmission reached the flagship Resolute. Scouts at the edge of human space had encountered the enemy. It was not a colony, not a fleet, but an ambush. Admiral Karan stood tall in the command chamber as the message played. Static filled the room, then the voice of a human pilot shouting, "They're here! Alien warships, dozens, no, hundreds." Then the sound of weapons fire, followed by silence. The room grew cold. Karan did not hesitate. "Change course," he ordered. "We go to them." Within minutes, thousands of ships turned, engines roaring as they rushed to the star system where their brothers and sisters were under attack. The galaxy would remember what happened next as the first true battle of the war. The human scouts were outnumbered and surrounded. Alien ships, sharp and monstrous in design, moved like predators around their prey. The aliens fired relentlessly, confident in their victory. Their weapons cut through 2 human frigates, tearing them apart in bursts of flame. The remaining scouts fought bravely, returning fire with everything they had, but they were only small ships. Against the alien swarm, their end seemed certain. Then the darkness of space lit up. Out of hyperspace, the human fleet arrived. Ship after ship burst into view, engines blazing, hulls shining in the light of the nearby star. First came destroyers, then cruisers, then carriers, then the massive battleships that dwarfed everything around them. Within moments, the aliens who had been hunters found themselves surrounded. The humans had arrived not with dozens, but with hundreds of thousands. The ambush had turned. It was now the aliens who were trapped. Admiral Karan's voice thundered across the fleet. "For Haven! Fire!" The void exploded with light as humanity's warships unleashed their fury. Railguns roared, lasers tore through shields, and missile swarms streaked across the darkness like burning comets. The alien ships, once so confident, were ripped apart in seconds. Their formations collapsed under the storm of human firepower. One alien cruiser tried to flee, but a squadron of human fighters cut it down, their small craft darting like angry wasps. Another alien battleship attempted to rally its forces, but the human flagship Resolute unleashed a broadside, shattering it into debris. The galaxy had never seen such fury. The humans fought with precision, with unity, with wrath carved into every blast. To the aliens, it seemed as if the ghosts of Haven themselves had risen to strike them down. But even in their fear, the enemy fought hard. They had numbers, they had firepower, and they had cruelty. Several human ships fell, consumed by alien blasts. The screams of dying crews echoed through comm channels. Pilots sacrificed themselves to protect their squadrons, ramming their ships into alien hulls when they had no weapons left. The battle was chaos, fire and blood across the stars. On the bridge of the Silver Star, Captain Reeve clenched his fists as he watched his gunners fire volley after volley. "No mercy," he whispered. "Not after Haven." His crew obeyed, their eyes hard, their hearts burning. They had seen the ruins of Haven, and now every alien ship they destroyed felt like a step toward justice. Hours passed, though to those fighting it felt like seconds. Slowly, the battle turned. Alien ships began to break and scatter. Some tried to retreat, engines flaring as they jumped to hyperspace. But the humans pursued them, cutting down many before they could escape. The rest were hunted down with merciless precision. When the last alien cruiser was destroyed, silence fell across the battlefield. Wreckage drifted in every direction, flames still burning in the void. Human ships floated among the ruins, some damaged, some scarred, but many still alive. For the first time, humanity had faced the enemy directly, and humanity had won. A cheer erupted across the fleet, spreading from ship to ship until it filled the channels like thunder. Soldiers shouted, pilots cried with relief, engineers hugged one another, and even the admirals allowed themselves small smiles. They had struck the first blow. Haven's screams had not gone unanswered. Yet among the wreckage, there was more than victory. A squadron of human marines boarded a crippled alien vessel, searching for information. They fought through corridors filled with smoke and fire, clashing with alien soldiers in brutal close combat. The humans prevailed, dragging one alien officer back alive. The creature snarled, its eyes filled with hate as it was thrown into a cell aboard the Resolute. When questioned, it gave only one chilling message. "You think this was a fleet? This was nothing. You cannot imagine what waits in our core worlds. You will drown in our fire." The words were carried to Admiral Karan, who listened in silence. For a long moment, no one in the chamber spoke. Then the old admiral turned to his officers. His eyes were hard, but there was no fear in them. "Then we will march to their core worlds," he said. "If fire is waiting, then humanity will answer with a storm." Across the fleet, the news of their first victory spread, but so did the warning. The enemy was vast. The massacre of Haven was only the beginning. Humanity had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Families on Earth celebrated when the message of victory reached them. Crowds filled the streets, cheering the names of the fallen and praising the courage of the living. Yet even in celebration, they knew this was only the first step. The enemy would strike again, harder, stronger, and more desperate. The galaxy trembled as word spread. Other species who had once ignored humanity now looked at them with awe and fear. The humans had answered Massacre with fire. They had unleashed a fleet the galaxy had never seen before. And they had won. But in the shadows, alien empires whispered to one another. Some feared humanity's rise. Others secretly hoped humanity would weaken the cruel empire that had long dominated them. The galaxy was changing, and the name Haven was now spoken as both a wound and a warning. Back aboard the Resolute, Admiral Karan stood at the observation deck, watching the wreckage drift among the stars. His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes cold as steel. "This is only the beginning," he murmured. "First blood has been drawn. Now the war begins." And with that, orders went out. The fleet was to advance. Humanity would not stop. Humanity would not wait. The road to the enemy's core worlds had opened, and 500,000 warships were ready to march into fire. The wreckage of the first battle still drifted in space, but humanity did not pause to admire its victory. The fleets gathered once more, engines roaring as orders spread through every channel. Admiral Karan stood on the command deck of the Resolute and spoke to his captains. His voice was calm but filled with steel. "We cannot wait for them to strike again. We carry the pain of Haven, and we carry the blood of our own dead. The enemy warned us of fire in their core worlds. Then that is where we will go. We march into their fire, and we will not stop until their empire burns." The message spread through the fleet, from massive battleships to small corvettes, and every soldier, every pilot, every mechanic understood. They were not only defending humanity anymore. They were carrying war into the enemy's heart. Soon, the fleet set course, hundreds of thousands of ships stretching across the void, their engines burning like a second galaxy. As they advanced, the first alien outposts came into sight. Small stations and border colonies, each flying the symbols of the empire that had massacred Haven. At first, the aliens were arrogant. They expected humanity to hesitate, to strike slowly. They thought their outposts would hold. But when the human fleet descended, it was like a storm tearing across the stars. Outposts that had once stood for decades fell in hours. The humans showed no mercy. Stations were shattered, ships destroyed, armies crushed under relentless fire. On one frozen moon, human marines stormed an alien garrison, their rifles blazing as they cleared corridors filled with defenders. The battle lasted less than a day, and when it was over, the human flag was planted in the ice. Messages were broadcast to every nearby system. "This is the vengeance of Haven. Humanity has come." The aliens were stunned. Never before had another species dared to strike so deep, so fast. The Empire's commanders tried to rally, but the humans pressed forward without fear. Each outpost they captured became a base. Each victory fueled the fleet's hunger for more. Soldiers who had once feared the enemy now shouted with pride. They had seen the aliens bleed, and now they wanted nothing more than to keep pushing. In the control rooms of the alien empire, panic grew. Reports flooded in, stations destroyed, fleets shattered, colonies falling to human hands. The Emperor slammed his claws against the floor, demanding answers. How can they move so fast? How can they fight with such fury? His generals had no answer. One finally admitted the truth. They fight as if every battle is personal. They fight as if every soldier carries the weight of 1,000 dead. They do not fight like others. They fight like humans. The Emperor roared in rage, but deep inside, even he felt a flicker of fear. The humans were different. Meanwhile, across human colonies, the news of each victory spread like wildfire. Families cheered, children shouted with joy, and workers redoubled their efforts in the factories. For every alien station destroyed, new volunteers lined up to replace the fallen. Humanity's grief was still deep, but now it was mixed with hope. They were no longer only victims. They were becoming conquerors. But war has its price, and humanity soon paid it. In one brutal assault, the fleet attacked a heavily fortified alien base built inside an asteroid. The defenses were far stronger than expected. Alien cannons ripped through human ships, and dozens were lost before the base was finally destroyed. The victory was won, but at a terrible cost. Hundreds of families back on Earth received messages of loss. Soldiers wept in silence for friends who would never return. Admiral Karan stood before his officers and reminded them, "This is the cost of vengeance. Every step into their fire will burn us. But remember Haven. Remember why we march." His words spread again, keeping the fleet united, their resolve unbroken. The advance continued, deeper and deeper into enemy space. Alien colonies fell one after another. Some tried to resist, and battles turned entire worlds into ashes. Others surrendered, terrified by the endless tide of human warships. To many alien civilians, the humans became both demons and saviors. Some feared them as monsters who came only for destruction. Others whispered that perhaps humanity would free them from the cruelty of their own empire. Whispers spread across the galaxy. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were changing everything. On board the Silver Star, Captain Reeve walked the halls, speaking to his crew. Many were tired, their eyes hollow from endless battles. Yet when he asked if they wished to rest, they all answered the same. Not until it's finished. Not until they pay for Haven. Their determination gave him strength, and he knew they would follow him to the end. Then came the message that shook the fleet. A group of scouts, chasing fleeing aliens, had discovered something vast. A massive gathering of enemy ships deep inside their space. Not just a fleet, an armada. Bigger than anything humanity had yet faced. It was clear the Empire had finally decided to stop underestimating the humans. They were calling upon their greatest strength to end this war in one decisive strike. The news spread through the fleet, and for the first time since the war began, doubt whispered through the ranks. Could even 500,000 human ships stand against the full might of an ancient empire? The answer came not from the admirals, but from the soldiers themselves. One pilot, speaking over an open channel, said what everyone was thinking. They may have more ships, but they will never have what we have. They will never have Haven. They will never have our rage. His words echoed across the fleet, lifting spirits once more. Humanity had come too far to turn back. They had burned too deep into enemy space. There was no retreat, only forward. Admiral Coran gave the order, and the fleet prepared. Ahead lay the greatest challenge they had yet faced. The enemy was waiting with fire, and humanity was about to step into the inferno. Engines burned. Weapons charged. Crews whispered silent prayers. The galaxy held its breath. Humanity was marching into the fire. The human fleet burned across the stars, 500,000 ships pushing deeper into enemy space. Victory after victory had carried them forward, but whispers ran through the ranks that the Empire would not remain silent forever. Humanity had taken their colonies, destroyed their fleets, and torn down their pride. It was only a matter of time before the enemy unleashed something greater. That time came when scouts detected strange energy readings from a distant system. At first, they thought it was another fortress or a gathering fleet, but as they approached, their sensors froze in disbelief. A shadow drifted across the stars, larger than any ship ever recorded. It was not a fleet. It was one ship, an enormous war machine the size of a small moon, built with weapons capable of tearing entire fleets apart. The aliens called it the Titan, a secret weapon hidden for centuries, waiting for a war worthy of its use. The scouts barely escaped, sending frantic warnings back to Admiral Coran and the fleet. When the images were shown on the command deck, silence fell. Every officer stared at the screen as the massive ship filled their view. Its hull glowed with strange energy lines, its weapons bristling like mountains, its engines larger than cities. For the first time since the war began, even the bravest soldiers felt fear. Admiral Coran's face was stern, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "This is their answer," he said quietly. "This is their monster." The fleet prepared, but no one could predict what would happen next. Days later, the Titan moved. It was slow, but unstoppable, crossing systems like a beast on the hunt. When it finally engaged, the results were devastating. At the Battle of Drosker's Reach, the Titan unleashed its first strike. A beam of raw energy, wider than a city, cut through space and tore apart 3 human battleships instantly. They didn't even have time to fire back. The shockwave destroyed another dozen ships caught too close. Panic spread through the fleet as crews realized they were facing something beyond their imagination. The Titan continued, firing again, each blast a storm of death. Hundreds of lives ended in minutes, and the human fleet was forced to scatter. But even in the chaos, humanity refused to break. Captains barked orders, crews steadied their hands, and fighters swarmed forward, trying to distract the monster. They struck its armor, but the shots barely scratched the surface. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. On the Resolute, Admiral Coran clenched his fists. "We cannot run," he told his officers. "If we flee now, this monster will hunt us across the stars. We must face it. We must bleed it." His words spread through the fleet, and slowly, the panic turned to grim determination. Ships regrouped, forming attack waves. Squadrons of fighters launched desperate strikes against weak points in the Titan's hull, sacrificing themselves to test its defenses. Engineers worked feverishly, rerouting power, overloading weapons, and building new strategies in the heat of battle. Captain Reeve, aboard the Silver Star, rallied his crew. "This isn't just a ship," he shouted. "This is their pride, their last hope. If we break it, we break them. Remember Haven. Remember why we fight." The crew answered with a roar, their voices echoing through the ship's halls. They charged forward, leading a formation of cruisers straight at the Titan's flank. The clash was brutal. Alien weapons shredded human ships, tearing them apart like paper, but the humans refused to retreat. They struck again and again, hammering the same section of armor until at last, a piece cracked. For the first time, the Titan bled sparks into space. Across the fleet, morale rose. It could be hurt. It could be killed. But the cost was unimaginable. Every hour of battle cost thousands of lives. Pilots screamed their last words as their fighters were incinerated. Battleships overloaded their reactors, ramming themselves into the Titan's guns to destroy them. Each sacrifice bought the fleet one more chance, one more opening. In the alien empire's throne room, the Emperor watched the battle through live feeds. At first, he smiled, certain that the Titan would crush humanity in a single night. But as the hours dragged on, his smile faded. No matter how many humans died, more came. No matter how many ships were destroyed, the fleet still pressed forward. He whispered in disbelief, "Why don't they break? Why don't they fear us?" His generals had no answer. Humanity was proving what no other species ever had, that even against a godlike weapon, they would fight until the stars themselves went dark. Back in the battle, Admiral Coron knew the moment of truth was coming. The Titan's weapons were powerful, but each shot drained enormous amounts of energy. Sensors showed a pattern, a moment of weakness between volleys. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He gave the order, "All ships, prepare for the final charge. We end this now." The fleet aligned, every ship turning toward the Titan. Engines burned bright as they pushed forward, knowing many would not return. Across the comm channels, soldiers spoke to one another. Some whispered prayers, some spoke names of loved ones, and some simply said, "For Haven." Then the Titan prepared its greatest strike, charging energy for a blast that could wipe out half the fleet in one shot. The humans had seconds. Admiral Coron gave the signal, and 500,000 ships surged forward, weapons blazing, a tidal wave of firepower crashing against the Titan. Fighters weaved through defenses, bombers hurled themselves at its shields, and battleships unleashed everything they had left. The Titan fired, and the beam carved a line of death through the fleet, destroying hundreds of ships instantly. But the humans kept coming. They did not stop, they did not falter. The Titan's shields flickered, its armor cracked under the relentless storm. Finally, a coordinated barrage from a dozen dreadnoughts punched through a weak point, ripping open a massive wound in its hull. Explosions tore across the Titan, but still it fought, still it refused to die. The battle raged on, every second costing more lives, until the humans prepared one final strike. Admiral Coron spoke through the fleet's channels, his voice steady. "This is the moment. Give everything you have. Humanity will not be broken. Fire!" And in that instant, every remaining ship unleashed its weapons, filling the void with light so bright it outshone the stars. The Titan's defenses shattered, its hull cracked apart, and a final explosion consumed the monster. The shockwave rocked the fleet, but when the fire cleared, the Titan was gone. Silence fell across the comms. The battlefield was littered with wreckage, thousands of human ships destroyed, but the impossible had been done. The Titan had fallen. Across the fleet, exhausted crews wept, cheered, and shouted. They had faced the greatest weapon of the Empire and lived. Yet Admiral Coron stood in silence, staring at the burning wreck. He knew this was not the end. The Empire still had fleets, still had armies, and humanity had paid dearly for this victory. But he also knew something else. The galaxy had just witnessed the unthinkable. Humanity had faced a god, and humanity had won. And now, nothing could stop them. The wreckage of the Titan still drifted in the void, its shattered hull glowing like the corpse of a dead star, but there was no time for celebration. Humanity had won a battle unlike any other, yet the war was far from over. Across the fleet, crews wept for their dead, ships burned, and survivors whispered in disbelief that they had destroyed the Empire's greatest weapon. Admiral Karan stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring into the blackness where the Titan once was. His eyes were tired, his uniform torn, but his voice was steady as he spoke to his officers. "We have broken their monster, but not their spirit. The Empire still has worlds, fleets, and armies. If we stop now, all we have paid will be for nothing. We did not march this far to turn back. We will end this war." His words spread through the fleet, and though many were weary, no one disagreed. They had lost too much to stop. The march continued, and humanity turned its full wrath upon the core worlds of the alien empire. As the fleet advanced, resistance grew fiercer. Massive enemy fleets tried to block their path, but none could stand against the tide of human ships. Battle after battle burned across the stars. Human warships unleashed barrages of fire that shattered enemy lines. Marines stormed alien strongholds, planting the human flag in halls where no outsider had ever walked. Civilians across conquered systems watched in awe as humans fought with a ferocity they had never seen. Some called them monsters, others called them liberators, but all agreed they were unstoppable. In one battle above a gas giant, the aliens threw everything they had at humanity, waves of ships, fighters, and weapons that darkened the skies. Yet humanity did not break. Pilots sacrificed themselves to protect their comrades, engineers worked until their hands bled to keep ships alive, and commanders shouted orders with voices hoarse from endless fighting. After 3 days of brutal combat, the alien fleet was in ruins, and humanity still stood. Fear spread through the Empire. Their leaders had promised victory, had sworn that the Titan would crush the invaders, but now those promises were dust. Whispers of rebellion began in their colonies. Some alien worlds sent secret signals to the humans, begging for mercy, begging to be spared the wrath of the Empire. Humanity did not answer. They were not here for mercy. They were here for vengeance. At last, the human fleet reached the capital system, the heart of the Empire, a place no enemy had ever dared to enter. The Emperor gathered his remaining forces, a vast armada still numbering in the tens of thousands, and waited. He sat upon his throne, claws digging into the arms of his seat, eyes burning with hatred and fear. "Let them come," he growled. "Let them bleed upon our gates." But when the humans arrived, they did not hesitate. They did not pause to measure the risk. They unleashed their fury in one final storm. The greatest battle of the war began. 500,000 human warships faced the Empire's last armada in a clash that shook the stars themselves. Space turned into fire as fleets collided, weapons blazing, ships exploding by the hundreds. The screams of the dying filled comm channels, but the humans pressed forward, driving deeper into the enemy formation with every strike. Admiral Karan commanded from the front, his voice carrying over every channel. "Remember Haven. Remember our dead. Today we finish this war." His words gave strength to even the most broken soldiers, and they fought with the rage of a species that refused to be forgotten. Slowly, painfully, the human fleet broke through the enemy lines. Alien ships fell one after another, their formations crumbling under the relentless assault. But the price was terrible. Entire human squadrons were lost, ships burning and breaking as they bought space for their comrades. Captain Reeve and the Silver Star fought in the thick of the battle, shields failing, weapons overheating, but still pressing forward. "We came this far," Reeve shouted. "We don't stop until their throne falls." His crew answered with a final cheer, charging into the fire. Hours turned into days, and the war raged without pause. Finally, humanity broke through the last line of defense, and the Empire's capital world stood exposed. Its skies filled with fire as human warships descended. The Emperor watched from his throne room, hearing the distant thunder of destruction. He realized then that his empire was finished. For centuries they had ruled with fear, but now fear had turned against them. Humanity entered his palace, soldiers marching with steel in their eyes, and for the first time, the emperor bowed his head. His last words before being taken were whispered in disbelief. How could they rise so high? How could they fight so hard? The answer came not from the soldiers, but from the silence that followed. Humanity had answered in blood. The war was over. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The alien empire had fallen, its fleets destroyed, its throne broken. Humanity had avenged Haven, but at a cost no one could ever forget. Entire fleets were gone, families torn apart, colonies left in grief. Yet even in mourning, there was pride. They had done the impossible. They had risen against an empire older and stronger, and they had won. Other species watched in awe, fear, and respect. Some swore never to challenge humanity. Others whispered of alliances, hoping to share in their strength. The galaxy would never be the same again. In the ruins of the capital, Admiral Koran stood among his officers. His uniform was torn, his face scarred, but his voice carried like iron. "Let this be known," he said. "If you strike at one human colony, if you spill human blood without cause, humanity will answer with fire. We came with 500,000 warships, and we will do it again if we must. This is humanity's answer." His words echoed across the stars, a warning and a promise. And so the story of Haven's vengeance was written into history, not just as a tale of war, but as a lesson to every species that watched. Humanity was no longer the quiet newcomers among the stars. They were a force that could not be broken, a people who carried their dead into battle and fought for them until victory was carved from fire. The galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity was here to stay, and no empire would ever forget the price of their wrath.